Hi, everyone. And hi, Brianna. Thank you for joining from Indiana. I saw yours as I went to college in Indiana, so I also always have a fond place in my heart. So thank you for joining. Thank everyone who is joining us today. We're so excited to be here today for a discussion about how to leverage the hybrid megatrend. We're so excited to talk about how we're all working to combine physical, in-person, and digital experiences to create maximum engagement. I'm Myllisa Patterson, Senior Director of Demand Generation here at Cvent, and I'm thrilled to be here today to facilitate this conversation with my Cvent colleagues. Before we get started, let's do introductions. Patrick, do you want to kick us off?
Sure can. Hi, everyone. I'm Patrick Smith, the Chief Marketing Officer here at Cvent. And as you can imagine, we love events. In any given year, we'll participate, either host or attend about 1,000 events, especially now that hopefully things are getting better with the pandemic. So we love events and we use our own technology. So can't wait to talk to you today about what we're seeing and why events are so important to marketing leadership and marketers in general. So welcome, everyone.
Thanks, Patrick. That was a great intro. Now we'll kick it over to Pradeep. Will you introduce yourself?
Hi, everyone. I'm Pradeep Mannakkara, CIO for Cvent. Super excited to be here and share some of my experiences. For some background, I'm responsible for general IT, our business applications, security, along with uptime and availability for our Cvent products.
Awesome. And now, last but definitely not least, McNeil.
Hello, everyone. I am McNeil Keenan, Vice President of Product Management, joining you here from the studio in our headquarters. I've been at Cvent the last 15 years. I started in a few different areas of the company, but for the last 10, I've been focused on product management. So I'm excited to share a perspective from more of the technologist point of view. What are the trends that we're seeing and trying to make sure that you and our customers can get ahead of those trends with the Cvent platform. So I'm excited to hopefully tie it all together from more of that technology perspective of where we see the key tech trends and what we're building to address those.
Really great. I'm so excited about the conversation that we're about to have. And speaking of conversations, we really want to engage with you during this presentation. So if you look at the right of the screen, of your screen in front of you, the engagement panel's there. If you can open that up, some of you already have and are using the chat, but use the chat. And then you'll also see the Q&A tab there. We're going to have at least 15 minutes at the end of this presentation to take your questions and interact. So please use that Q&A tab. That lets everybody see your questions and also upvote so we can take the most popular. So keep an eye on that in addition to using the chat to interact with each other. So hybrid megatrend is the topic of the day. Seems maybe like, whoa. And because we're Cvent, like we might have the course of action to really think we're just going to talk about events and thinking about hybrid events. But this trend, the reason it's a mega trend and this thought of hybrid is so much larger and really encompasses how organizations of all kinds are combining physical experiences with digital/virtual ones to open new channels of engagement with both customers, prospects, and employees. The pandemic accelerated our digitization, and being able to do and participate more from remote locations has completely changed the way we think about working and connecting with each other and doing things. And that opportunity to work or do things from anywhere isn't going anywhere. Pradeep's joining us today from an exotic location, which I'll let him share as he gets into it. But like, we want that flexibility in our lives to be able to participate in both work and other types of experiences, either in person or virtually. And that's not going to change. And as we think about more in-person coming back, because if the pandemic taught us anything, it was that we really thrive and crave those in-person interactions too. So combining flexibility of anywhere with also wanting to be together sometimes, it's changing the way we think about everything, and meaning we have to think hybrid for most things. In particular, and what we're going to talk a lot about today, workforce. People want to work from anywhere, but also sometimes want to come to the office, or some people really want to be in the office every day. Events, how we are going to use them to drive engagement with customers and prospects in whatever format works for them. And then finally, training and education. So much more opportunity to extend the breadth of who we can train and how many people we can train. So all of these scenarios and this entire trend is really putting stress on how we do business and how we work together. So I really want to get Pradeep's input as we think about, especially within the context of Cvent, a 4,000 plus person company. How are we thinking about reshaping employee engagement in this hybrid universe?
No, thank you. That's a pretty broad topic that you've kind of set us up for. Like you said, the landscape has changed a lot, significantly, in more ways than we could have even imagined, right? To reflect, it's been over 2 years since many of us have actually started the path of working from home, right? We've actually done in the last, I'd say several months, several pilots in terms of kind of getting back to return to office, or in reality, what we're getting towards is a hybrid kind of work environment. And there's so much learning that we're going through. I think when we pivoted to work from home, it was the pandemic that caused us to pivot, and we essentially, I think we took that on, and how should I say, we made it work. Now that we're trying to go back to a return to office or to an environment where it's hybrid, there's a lot of retraining that we're having to do to ourselves. For example, we've had some folks that have come into the office that are kind of working from there, and certain basic things like, how do I share from a conference room? We've forgotten that from our sort of experiences because we've had a different environment for the last 2 years to do. I also look at the quality we had where everybody is a tile of a certain size, and how meetings were conducted. Everybody sort of sees each other. We're able to share. We have an equal space kind of within that meeting. We go back to our hybrid approach, and now you have folks in a meeting room. You have some of the inefficiencies where there's certain internal room chatter, and the folks that are on the virtual or hybrid environment don't actually fully get to participate in that, or vice versa. So there's a lot of things that we've taken for granted historically that are sort of coming into play, and we say, well, how do we make this experience better? I also look at as going back to the office, and we're finding out there's a lot of maintenance and upkeep that we have to sort of redo after 2 years of things sitting idly. It's kind of like hosting a large dinner party at your home, but you haven't lived there in the last 2 years, and there's a lot of cleaning and bringing back to life that needs to occur.
Such a good point. So speaking of events, you weaved it in nicely. Can you talk to us about how CIOs maybe are more involved in media and events than maybe they were before the pandemic?
Yeah, that's actually a really good point. In myself working as a CIO for an events company, I would say our involvement in terms of our actual Cvent Connect experiences with internal IT has been very low. Now with virtual and hybrid, that has shifted quite a bit in terms of where there's a much tighter partnership with the CMO, the marketing folks, the event planners, than traditionally. Now, what I would also say, traditionally, CIOs, the IT department may look at maybe the network piece, Wi-Fi, kind of provide feedback, and that was kind of it. Now, I will tell you, I feel the stress with every one of you that has to kind of run events or manage events because I feel it. I've been in the war rooms. I've been in where you go, okay, so I hope this thing actually works. I hope this stream works. We don't run into issues. And when we do, we're like kind of breathe and go, I hope we can resolve this so we have a great experience for everyone that's virtual, because otherwise you will hear about it. Because what's great about having an engagement platform such as ours is you have an engagement platform. What's also not so great is people will let you know when things aren't going well. But nonetheless, I think the key here is, how do you make sure that IT being involved now more and more. For those IT folks that are listening, what I'd say is if you're not involved, make sure you partner with your marketing teams and actually get involved. And for the marketing folks that are listening, is if you're not involving IT, you need to kind of do that. And especially in the virtual hybrid space, because there's a lot more components than I think that any one of our groups necessarily thinks about. And I can give you some good examples of that kind of partnership, all the way from, I'll say, kind of upfront procurement process, because a lot of times what you want to make sure is you're going with a partner that is secure. So security is a big piece. Do they have an ISO 27001? Do they have a SOC 1, SOC 2? Do they have external certification that says, yeah, they're actually doing these things that they should be, that are best practices, and that they're being viewed on an annual basis, or at least they're recertifying those on an annual basis. Things such as privacy. Are they adopting privacy regulations and compliances such as GDPR and some of the state privacy regulations that are out there? And are they able to demonstrate that to you? And then the other part is availability, right? Is there a good disaster recovery plan? Is there uptime, their SLAs actually available to you, that you know the platform is going to be up, especially when it doesn't matter what the size of the event is, every event is important and could have a brand impact. I mentioned sort of the partnership and with the marketing folks and the planner folks. The IT folks definitely need to also get involved, because I think a lot of times, if we're new to this, we kind of look and we go, okay, the marketing folks know what they're doing. I'll be here if they need something. And the answer is no. Our role most of the times is to go, it's not when things go perfect. I think a lot of times folks are great at when the event goes perfect and things happen. The reality is I haven't seen an event yet where everything's gone perfect. There's always some glitch or the other. And the question is, how much rehearsal prep do you have to actually mitigate against that? In terms of the IT folks, what I would say is your role is to kind of say, okay, well, what happens if the stream's not going to work? What happens if we get some sort of other issues? Or do we have duplicate encoders available that we can pull from? If one goes bad, we can switch over to the other. So those are the types of questions that you will typically see the IT folks asking. And then what we also try to do is prep for that, ideally the day before. Now, that also means you're juggling getting event space, making sure everything is set up, as well as running these tests. And we all know how stressful and last minute things are by the time you get the floor space and whatnot. But those are things that we do as a team, and we sort of divide and conquer. I can tell you a lot of war stories, especially right sort of after the pandemic, when everybody shut down for a couple of years, and then we were one of the first to host some hybrid events, and we felt impacts with some of the venues because people were gone. Maybe they hadn't been patching some of their equipment so regularly, or maybe the network's been sort of sitting there idly. But when you start to then put load and people and traffic, you start to experience things that you haven't before. Well, on the day of event, if you didn't plan for things, it sometimes gets too late, or it's going to be very expensive. So what I would definitely say is rehearse in terms of the things that could go wrong, and then what you're going to do to quickly recover. Instrumentation is another really important thing. The platform that you partner with needs to have good instrumentation. I can tell you where instrumentation has saved us phenomenally, just because you get that 30 seconds to a minute, which seems like 10 minutes, to try and reach out to the marketing teams and say, hey, there's probably going to be some sort of issue that's going to occur. Be ready to post that in the chat, because just like the chat interactivity that you have, you're going to be very verbal when something's not working, or if it's a bit of a nuisance for you. At the same time, as we're able to resolve it, we're able to let our marketing teams know, hey, we think we're going to resolve it, but they might see a 10-second buffer before they see that resolved. It's better you post that than us magically resolving it and not saying anything, which then you can actually turn in a negative situation into a great situation. But anyway, I can ramble for a lot in terms of the experiences that we have, but I'm going to pause and give Patrick and McNeil a chance to talk more about their areas.
Yeah, thanks so much, Pradeep. I rehearse is going to be my one of my new mottos with my team, which is great. So Patrick, Pradeep sort of led us into talking about events, but from a CMO's perspective, how's the hybrid megatrend reshaping our marketing programs?
Thanks, Myllisa. So I am very excited to talk about what's happening in the world of events from a CMO perspective. In short, the impact events can have for marketers is greater than it has ever been before. And the question is why? And I think it's something we've hit, and Myllisa, you hit earlier. It's because of the widespread digitization of events that occurred due to the pandemic. When most events went virtual, that meant they went digital. And anything that's digital can inherently be tracked and measured. So digital events broke down accessibility barriers. We saw people attend who couldn't jump on a plane, couldn't take time out of the office. It caused attendance to skyrocket, which we loved as marketers. And it really created a massive spike in digital demand signals that marketers love. So the digitized events world put real, trackable, measurable engagement at the center of events. Before, events were a little fungible, maybe offline. You thought you had a good experience if you were the event organizer or the attendee, but it made events very measurable. And today's marketers don't want to give this up. So we're now entering a world where 3 event formats are at our fingertips. Virtual events that can drive massive engagement to attendees all over the world, as I talked about earlier. In-person events that can drive deep engagement with in-depth, face-to-face interactions, and then, of course, hybrid events, which offer the best of both worlds. And that's why at Cvent, we ran our user conferences, the last 2 in Vegas and our one in Europe, as hybrid events. So what's underpinning all of these event formats, including in person, is how you can build events that encourage and capture digital engagement information that lets you, the event organizer, deeply understand what your buyers are interested in. And that's really the great thing that's come out of the pandemic. Engagement is now central to all events. It's central to all of marketing. Because when someone engages with your brand, it means people are paying attention to your message, that they are giving you their precious time in a very noisy world. So forward-thinking organizations are building events from the ground up to encourage engagement interactions and capturing it all along the way. This is what we do at Cvent. My events team builds events together with our demand generation teams to encourage and maximize engagement interactions. So the question might be, what do I mean by engagement interactions? Things like session attendance, content downloads, polls that were taken, surveys that were taken, questions that were asked during an event, and much more can all be digitized through Cvent technology for all event formats, including in-person only events. So this engagement information is what I love about it. It's immediately actionable because we compile these interactions into one event engagement score. And since we integrate with hundreds of marketing automation and CRM systems, the leads from our events, with all of this engagement intelligence at the center, is immediately actionable. For example, at our global user conference, Cvent Connect, which we held in August of 2020 as a virtual only event back then due to the pandemic, we ran it on the Cvent Attendee Hub. We generated 1.1 million unique engagement points across the attendees. At our hybrid user conference 8 months ago, we generated 750,000 unique engagement points. But best of all is we compiled and scored all of this information by attendee and got the leads to sales within 2 days. So incredible insight across thousands of unique contacts with super fast actions taken is the promise of today's events world. And let me give you one example. Webinars are another area that's ripe for a refresh. When we think about better engagement, what about the old webinar? You no longer can have voice over PowerPoint as a webinar format that we think is going to work effectively. So after attending interactive virtual events for 2 years, people don't want static, boring experiences where speakers typically recorded and off camera drone on over top of slides for 45 minutes. Technologies exist, such as Cvent Studio, for example, which we're using right now, that can take your webinars from boring to buzzworthy. Having live presenters on camera where content is displayed dynamically depending on the content is something you can do today. The speaker can be full screen for an intro with lower thirds for their title. Then the speaker and graphics can be side by side. Then you can go to full screen with content when the content is rich and in depth. So all this dynamism is making an experience richer for the attendee. You can even do things like play videos in the middle of a webinar to spike the audience's attention. And what I'm really describing here is something that we see all the time, which is a TV show. that news broadcast you always tune into, that NFL highlight show that you don't want to miss. That's what you can create now with this technology. And now take this mentality of driving engagement in one event, like a webinar, and think about how powerful it is to build an engagement plan across your total event program, across all your event types and formats, across the events you host and those you also attend. In this world, you can then get engagement information by contact and account, not just for one event and that webinar, but across all the events you're part of. So take your big prospect, for example. Let's call it Prospect A. By taking this total event program approach with engagement in the center, you can understand what events you've run that prospect has attended. You can see which individual contacts from Prospect A attended which events. You can see how each attendee engaged and how engaged they were throughout all the different events they attended. You can also see which products this contact was interested in by studying the engagement actions taken. From an individual event to a total event program, engagement is everything, and nothing delivers actionable engagement better than events. And that's why I'm so excited about the new events world that we're in. It's why I continue to say that events, if engagement is built in from the beginning, can deliver more insight into buyer interest faster than any other marketing tactic. But here's the thing. There's an opportunity to extend this engagement even further. It's not just about engagement at the event during that specific hour or those specific couple days. You can engage beyond the event date themselves to engage with your attendees long before and after your events end. With the rise of technologies like video, online networking, and virtual event platforms that are now becoming engagement platforms, organizations have the tools they need to engage with their attendees before the event occurs and to carry on the conversation after the fact, even if their events are in person only. And this is a concept we're calling year-round engagement, or live engagement, if you want to call it that. It has the potential to be a game changer for all of us. So I'm very excited about the world of engagement I described, not just during an event, not just during that webinar that you've up-leveled, but across all the events you run.
Thanks, Patrick. So much good and meaty stuff there. This concept of year-round engagement, we've been talking about it a lot, but I know a lot of people have a lot of questions about that in general.
Yep.
So can you give us some examples of what you mean?
Yeah, here's an interesting use case. And you talk about this hybrid megatrend. This is a great example of that hybrid world coming together. Let's say someone has Cvent and they're running an in-person event, right? Then some of the things you can do before anyone ever engages is you can get them to build their agenda. Sorry, before they ever attend, you can get them to build the agenda. You can allow them to set things up like appointments pre-booked on site. They can personalize their profile based on their interests. You can get people networking before the in-person event ever takes place, so they can meet with similar people on site. In fact, this happened last year at Cvent Connect. We had a whole bunch of people organically want to meet before they ever got on site. So these are all things you can do. Assemble a must-see list of exhibitors, for instance. These are things you can do before you ever have that in-person event if you have a platform like Cvent Attendee Hub as an engagement platform. As these actions are taken, the things I described, the engagement interactions are being compiled. And what can you do with information like this? Let's say through the networking I described and through content downloads and the pre-booked appointments and creating their schedule, let's say you have all that information. And then you understand that one of your prospects is interested in a particular product. Well, then you can set up a meeting on site with your best customer in advance because you know what that person was interested in. So that's just an example of engaging before and what you can do with that information. Now let's talk about engaging after your event has ended. What are some of those engagement actions you can encourage? If you recorded your content at that in-person event, you can encourage your attendees to watch sessions they missed on demand. You can encourage them to join a post-event meetup on a specific topic. You can encourage them to download content from one of the exhibitors that was there. And why is this powerful? Well, how great would it be if I can use that insight to invite this attendee to my next related event, targeted to their specific interests, to keep taking them down a buying path? That's what you can do with this engagement mentality before and after events. So to summarize what I'm talking about as a CMO and why we're so excited about events and using our technology to harness this information is the events opportunity in front of us is all about engagement at unprecedented levels, with unprecedented speed, with unprecedented insight. And it's something we've called the golden age of events. The golden age of events means that at the program level, with a total event program mindset that takes advantage of virtual, in-person, and hybrid, you're generating higher audience attendance, and more attendees equals more engagement. At the event level, since everything is now digitized, you're gathering more specific engagement interactions. And now with this year-round engagement mentality, you're filling in the white space between events as well, with, you guessed it, more engagement. And more engagement is always a great thing as marketers because it gives us such deep intelligence into buyer insights. That's the world we're in now, and it's really exciting.
Yeah, and it is so exciting from a marketing perspective, from an HR perspective, right? Like these abilities to be able to see what people are doing and connect people across virtual and in person, and then do the next best thing and optimize is really exciting for how we're going to continue to connect and meet moving forward and do business. So we've talked about a lot of innovative and exciting things. All this trend is really having an impact on our tech stacks, right? All this digitization means a lot of tech. So McNeil, can you give us some thoughts on how the hybrid trend is reshaping how our organization should be thinking about technology investments?
Yeah, absolutely. Patrick, I don't know if you know, you're a tough act to follow. Karina literally said about halfway through, said, preach. So that was awesome. Been loving watching the chat flow through. We're literally sitting here in the studio, experiencing and living the technology of running a quasi-hybrid event, although this is mostly virtual, ourselves. And we're love to see that people are logging in from London. They're logging in from probably 3 different continents. I think I saw flow through there, and probably 15, 16 different states. We've got users of the Cvent platform. We've got executives. We've got thought leaders in the industry. Corbin, Ball, hello. I'm glad you joined us. Thanks for chiming in on the chat. So, seeing and living the technology, the world of tech in events looks very, very different today than it did 2 years ago. And so you've heard a lot of insights from, what does the CIO care about? What does the CMO care about? And if I was to summarize it in 3 or 4 points, Pradeep talked about reliability. Is it going to be up? And do you have a game plan if it's not? He talked about security. He talked about privacy. Patrick talked about engagement, and ultimately, for the sake of what? Making an impact on your business, right? So you're thinking about the reliability, the security, data privacy, and ultimately impact on your business. Those concerns have always been there, but what's different now in this kind of new world of technology? Well, first of all, it's a lot more engaging than it was before. So when you're thinking about your virtual audience in the hybrid world, it's not just people calling into a teleconference line and watching someone click through a PowerPoint. There's so many more ways to engage. So where does that start? Well, it starts with logging in. And the people that are going to be interacting in your environment, you need to make sure that they are who they say they are, because they're going to be interacting with your speakers. They're going to be interacting with your panelists and your fellow attendees in the chat, in the networking. So you've got to create an environment where, first of all, people are who they say they are, and it's a safe environment. And so we look at ways to maintain community safety because there's just so much more engagement that's enabled in this virtual digital world. Now, data privacy is the next thing. It used to be that people thought of events as an offline experience. And so there really wasn't as much of that kind of digital footprint. There was some of it. You might know which sessions people went to. You might know, did they respond with the audience response? But now, every click, every view really spits out what some of our marketing team says, data exhaust. And as they say in Spider-Man, with great power comes great responsibility. And so you make sure that you have that more transparent and open environment where people have an expectation of what you're going to do with their data and that you're transparent in how you're going to use it. So for example, what are you tracking in the experience? Is that clear in your terms of use? Who are you sharing it with? And did they opt in and proactively consent to sharing that data. I know there's a lot of temptation to share attendance lists and share anyone that clicked or viewed on a third-party booth to that exhibitor because you want to demonstrate the ROI that they got from your event. But did that meet the expectations? Did that meet regulations and regulatory compliance with things like GDPR and CCPA, where you have a right to be forgotten, a right not to be tracked, a right for your data not to be shared or sold? So we, from a technology perspective, really believe in privacy by design. And so we're always trying to enable the right defaults, the right settings, so that your attendees are going to have an engaging experience, but also know exactly how their data is being shared and used. And that's one of our key goals. Now, when we think about all that data that is being captured, whether that's for your in-person experience or your virtual one, right? Every click and view in the app as they're walking through your doorways, scanning their badge at a booth or at a session, that is telling us a lot about a customer or a prospect and what intent they have, what engagement levels they have. But a huge problem for especially marketers is making sense of that data. It can be tables and tables and tables and rows of data. You could spend weeks trying to assemble it to make sense of it. But if you take that long, it starts to become less relevant. So our goal is to make sure that you can make sense of all of those data points. Patrick talked about 1 million data points we tracked at Connect Virtual, 750,000 at Connect Hybrid. But how does that turn into action? So we built things like engagement scoring that can kind of listen to that stream of hundreds of thousands or millions of events and assign a score to it. Maybe an overall engagement score or a buyer score around some specific products or content. And maybe you're an association. You're not selling anything. Great, but understanding who's interested in what, that's really valuable for you to be able to better segment your audience, target them in conjunction with your sponsors. And so we're looking at ways to not only activate that data in the product, but then how are you going to integrate it to your broader MarTech stack? Many of you might be looking at customer data platforms so that every customer interaction from your website to downloading a PDF to interactions with your sales team, and yes, your live events, your webinars, your virtual events, your hybrid events, your in-person events, every interaction is able to flow through to that customer data platform or can flow through to your CRM or your marketing automation system. So we think a lot about that. Now that we're thinking about privacy, we're thinking about compliance, we're thinking about reliability, but also interoperability. How is it going to really kind of be distributed so that other stakeholders in your organization can take advantage of all that rich engagement that can happen in your live experiences, whether an audience member is attending virtually or in person. So those are some of the key things that we're seeing just as it relates to some of those concerns we heard from Pradeep and from Patrick as well.
Yeah, really, really good insights. And especially love the pieces about how we take all the data and get to action, being able to do something, getting to action. Okay, whenever I have the opportunity to talk to McNeil and product people, I want to know what's coming. So my next question is, what's driving the next generation of attendee engagement?
Yeah, so really what's different, right? What's different than the 2019 in-person events that we were all used to? No, we all want to get back to. Ultimately, the technology is driving new opportunities to engage. And so just like we saw all the way back in 2010, we went from paper event guides to mobile apps. And that was a whole new medium to drive engagement, kind of a layer woven throughout the event experience. Now, primarily, the mobile app impacted the during the event experience. So from check-in at the reg desk to leaving to the airport, people engage with that app, use it as a guide, use it as a way to connect with other attendees and sponsors. But at the center of this next digital evolution, really, it's video, all things video. That could be live streaming, that could be simulive, that could be real-time web RTC experiences, and of course, on-demand content to mix live and on-demand experiences to drive engagement on people's own time. So what does that really mean from a product perspective? Well, let's break it down. First of all, for just a single event experience, so you're running that in-person event, that before event experience it starts to look an awfully lot like a virtual experience. I mentioned this on main stage at Cvent Connect just a few weeks ago, in that you're leveraging video to engage with your audience no matter where they are, and they're not yet on site. They're joining you remotely. So how can we drive engagement that's something other than the know before you go email? Something other than, a drip campaign of 3 or 4 emails and an FAQ document? Can we do that in a live stream? Can we enable people to not just peruse through an attendee list, but actually meet remotely? Maybe we'll use the term virtually. So it might be things like instant networking or topic-based discussions, so that you're encountering people that have similar interests to you, that have expertise that you're interested in tapping into. And that's a great short list of people to queue up to engage with when you're all together on site in person. So there are even some questions in the chat and Q&A already. What does that experience look like? Well, before the event, great opportunity to bring together your virtual audience and your in-person audience, but it looks like a virtual event experience in the days and weeks leading up to it. Now, during the event, we do start to diverge a little bit. Such new opportunities to expand your reach. Patrick talked about the ways to think about it, thinking of it like a sporting event. I love that analogy. There was a question in the Q&A already. How can we have the same experience? And I don't think that's the goal. The goal really is to have a differentiated experience, because there's different restraints, right? Different constraints. The audience at home probably isn't going to be able to give you 8 hours. The audience in person, well, hey, they flew away from their office, their home. They want to make the most out of those 2 or 3 days they've given you. So they want 8 to 10 hours of programming. Maybe not so with your virtual audience. But again, leveraging video to expand that reach, create more bite-sized content, and maybe even content that you're not even giving to your in-person audience. So having a unique but first-class experience is the new opportunity with video. And then after the event, Patrick talked about this, so I won't talk about it too much, but there's no secret. You are creating a lot of video content now. It used to be a miracle that attendees would even get a copy of the PowerPoint. And even when you did, not that valuable, right? You're just seeing some images that people spoke to. Now there's an expectation that everything's recorded, and we've seen the value of recording it because we record everything by default. For example, today's session, there's one gentleman in the chat that was asking for a copy of the recording. Well, we don't even need to send a MP4 file out. It's going to be available on demand for playback in about 20 minutes after this session automatically. Your attendees for in-person events are going to expect everything to at least be recorded, even if not everything was live streamed, so they can engage on their own time. So that changes the event experience. But what about what happens in between events? There's such a whole new opportunity. Patrick talked about year-round engagement. That can mean 2 things to really think about. First of all, we can run a lot more virtual events, hybrid and in person, and we can get in front of that same person more times throughout the year with the added reach of hybrid in addition to virtual and in person. So that's a great way to build a community, to build a relationship, to build a deeper engagement pattern with that individual, all through live experiences. But there's an additional opportunity to engage with them on their own time. And it really revolves around leveraging that video content that you've created in your event program. And so it may not need to be presented in the context of the event, because engagement does die off after events, and that's not a bad thing. Ultimately, we drove urgency. We did so with scarcity and FOMO. We got people there. We got them together and networking at the same time. That's going to fall off, and it should. But so can you free those video assets and increase your brand awareness, increase engagement between those events? And so at Cvent Connect, we announced a new initiative that we're going to be launching in early Q3. So we're going to basically have a video center where you can take all these assets, make them more publicly available to drive that engagement between events and create awareness for your upcoming events as well. So video as driving engagement, both a totally different engagement pattern for each and every in-person and hybrid event, and changing the role of events in the program. That's where we see huge opportunities that can be unlocked.
Awesome. So I keep saying, oh, it's so exciting. So much to be excited about. And we've covered a lot of ground. Thank you all for your input and insights and different perspectives on this trend. It's been great. And we have tons of questions. So let's start start to take them. McNeil, well, one of the questions he just referenced it as he was speaking, but we sort of heard his answer on doesn't necessarily have to be the same experience, but a lot of people are interested in this, like this experience between in person and what's happening virtually, and how do you both connect those audiences. There's questions about that, but then also make sure everybody's having a great experience. And so I thought I'd kick it to Patrick too, because we spent a lot of time in our last 3 big hybrid events thinking about this and sort of trying to design great experiences for both audiences. So Patrick, you want to weigh in?
Yeah, so I think the mantra that we use for our hybrid events is 1 event, but 2 experiences, and they're optimized for that audience. So we know what gets people typically on a plane. It might be the experiential factor. It might be a really important meeting you want, but we also know that people can't necessarily go in person. So you have to tap into, when you're even promoting your event, into the needs and the value of the virtual side of it. So I know a lot of people are concerned about cannibalization, but one of the approaches we took is, let's say we thought 10 people could go from an organization. Let's try to get the 2 or 3 that need to be there in person based on their role, and really promote the in-person event and hit that hard from a sales follow-up. Then the virtual audience, the 7 or 8 more people that can attend, let's let them know what sessions are interesting. Let them know that you can attend virtually and get a lot of value out of it. So it was that 1 event, 2 experiences mentality, but the 2 experiences mean you need to promote that experience specifically to the people you want to. And also you need to create an experience from a viewership perspective, and McNeil got to this, which is optimized around both audiences. You can't just have the camera in the back of the room and trying to look at the speaker and the content at the same time if content's being displayed. You really need that virtual production experience. This is like what you're seeing today, which is the speaker speaking and the content right next to him, maybe full speaker for a little bit, maybe content for a little bit. You just can't have the camera in the back of the room. So in that way, the audience in the room is getting a great experience because they're immersed in the event. They see the screens, they see the speaker. And then the virtual audience is also having a good experience built for what they want. So if you take this 1 event, 2 experiences mentality for how you promote the event and the messaging you use, and also how you build that visual experience, you're going to have a much better event than you might have had previously with that classic camera in the back of the room. And it allows you to do more things like live stream and get that true hybrid experience versus just allowing people virtually to watch the recording.
Yeah. And all great points. I think the other thing that we learned a lot after our first run and then in the last 2 events was even thinking about staffing. Like, we spent a lot of time thinking about staffing in person, but staffing the virtual environment, having people on hand to engage in chat, work with people on Q&A, right? Like that unique experience, in addition to everything we've talked about, just having people from your organization there engaging in and interacting just like you do on site. That's a super important. Those pieces are important to make sure people, you don't want the audience to feel like they're just left in virtual land with no hospitality or catering. Yeah.
I mean, we had people literally staffing both the in-person and the virtual. And it's so important because then you get that rich conversation going. You're answering questions. You're helping them navigate to the next best session. So I think a great best practice is have a virtual and in-person staffing plan for sure. McNeil?
Yeah. So, I was just going to add, we didn't spend a lot of time thinking about how to have virtual attendees interact with in-person attendees. And there's a little bit of logic to that. You don't want to, people did, they committed a lot of their time to go into that in-person experience. And so you don't necessarily want to distract from it. We want them to be engaging face-to-face and not trying to get them to engage with a virtual audience. But there is something to demonstrating that this event experience, there's something more than meets the eye for both audiences. So if I'm in person and I see the chat firing off, I see the Q&A with 75 upvotes, it's all because it's one solution, right? So you have chat, you have Q&A, you have polling. Everybody's participating in it together. So they at least get that sense that, hey, I know I can see the 1,500 people here in the room with me, but there's another set of 5,000 people or 10,000 people that are engaging. And so it is kind of that collaborative audience engagement experience that shows there is more than meets the eye, which I think is really great. But it doesn't really need to say, hey, I need to let my in-person audience go into a booth and video conference with somebody that's remote. our focus really was let virtual attendees network with each other, let the in-person attendees network while they're face-to-face. But potentially there were some nice kind of cross-pollination opportunities pre-event.
Yeah, and it's kind of interesting too. I'll add something else, that you have to be respectful of the audience and knowing that the virtual audience shouldn't be on an island. So one of the things when I spoke at Connect a couple weeks ago, twice, we did Q&A. It was through the mobile app. And even if you don't have a specific mobile app for event, the Cvent Attendee Hub is the same experience in your hand, on your PC. So we want Q&A submitted through that. It's not fair to the virtual audience if you pass a mic around the room and try to repeat the question. So we said early on, if you want to participate in the Q&A, pull out your mobile device, which you probably have in your pocket, and submit your question that way. And then we took them on stage. So, and some people were taken aback, like, you're not going to do pass mics? No, because we're digitizing things. So we want to encourage that's those ways to connect the audience. We did some live polling where you had people in the room and people virtually responding, and that's a way to unite those groups. So you don't have to force the unification of your audiences, but in certain situations like Q&A and polling, I think it's pretty handy to have technology to get that shared experience built.
So that was Lisa's question that also got a lot of votes, was how do you manage on-site and virtual Q&A simultaneously? So if you didn't catch that, Lisa, through the app is how we do it and how we prescribe best practice. Okay, should we take another one? Yeah. So someone just wants to clarify and reiterate, and so maybe one of you can chime in specifics. The Cvent platform data can flow into CRM systems and other engagement interaction systems like HubSpot or Marketo, or you want to talk about integrations a bit? Somebody
who wants to take this one? Well, I want Pradeep to have some time. So Pradeep is interesting. As a CIO, you look a lot at how Cvent corporate ties all our data together and runs it. So maybe you should chime in first.
Absolutely. We do this, right? We leverage a lot of our, drink our own champagne. We take a lot of our own data, send it within our Salesforce system, our Marketo system. There's a lot of interaction with all of these different touch points you heard Patrick talk about, and we are just thirsty for this information. Now, I can also tell you in terms of integrations that we've done for our other clients, I've got teams that also help enable integrations from our Cvent technology stack into a lot of different applications, because each of you also have slightly different, I'll call it variations or use cases. I'd rather we didn't, but the reality is you want to look at things differently, and we can also assist with that process. But definitely that is a very common kind of process that people want, is to leverage the APIs, to leverage the integrations into a lot of their marketing and Salesforce type applications.
Yeah, I mean, when we think about it from a product perspective, what we want to enable customers to do is essentially deliver this information, right? These buying signals, intent signals, maybe satisfaction signals and dissatisfaction signals to your stakeholders. That might be the rest of your marketing department. That might be your customer service team. That might be your executive team. There's a lot of different stakeholders there, but if you can build that pipeline in a consistent way so that everybody knows how they're going to be able to operationalize on that data, that's a job of somebody that's probably going to get promoted to the next level. And from a product perspective, we even look at it that way. When we look at how we build software, our goal as a product team is to not only build great software with great feedback loops, so we're listening to our customers, but also making sure that we understand product engagement in each of our users and bringing that data to the organization as well. And so we've started to take that mentality ourselves of saying, hey, is this a user that's not engaged? A user that really is just logging in and seeing reports, or a user that's logging in every single day and they are the power user? Maybe we can introduce more advanced content to that user versus a more passive user that might log in just a few times a year. So when you can deliver this rich engagement data about your members, about your donors, about your prospects and customers to all your stakeholders, that's kind of really the ultimate power play from an event marketing perspective.
For sure. And really, like, that integration point from a demand gen perspective, I always say like there's the data the machines care about, because it's so much data, like you can't take that, going back to taking that action. It's really challenging. So the integration is key for actually doing something often, to be able to take the data points, bubble them into something that then people can understand and make decisions on, and then trigger the appropriate actions.
Yeah, Myllisa, one note on that is that, when we did our Cvent Connect event, because there's so much qualified activity going on, we had a specific engagement score just for Cvent Connect. And that's what we scored everything and compiled it and ranked it and sent it to sales. It was based just on Connect. At the same time, that is also supplementing the lead score that we had in Marketo. So it's adding to that as well. And for a lot of the other events we run that aren't as big as Connect, we're just going to take that information, and the engagement information we're getting from that specific event is supplementing what we know in Marketo. So our lead score is increasing the more actions people are taking. So it's a great example of how we're using, you could do an engagement score by event if you like, across all events, and also supplement your existing lead scoring methodologies due to the integrations that we have.
This is a whole webinar on its own, and we should get it on the schedule, because so all of that's so true. But then as we think about how year-round engagement is shaping that, like if you're driving a lot of engagement before your event, we would historically wait for the event to happen to have the trigger event to do something meaningful with sales or CS or whomever it is. But we're having to rethink, when do we call? What triggers are we looking for? If people are super engaged even before they get to the event, what's the appropriate action from a sales and customer success perspective? So anyway, lots of interesting stuff to dig into there.
I totally agree. And it's thinking beyond the event dates, right, is really what we're talking about. And now you're in this world where you can engage. And that's why if you get all that good information, set up that meeting on site for your in-person event with that awesome customer that can tell that story to that prospect that is interested, all due to the engagement they did before the event even happened. That's magic, really, for marketers.
Yeah. Magic is the word. Peppered with lots of hard work.
True.
Okay. Let's move on, because we got a little sidetracked, but it was really good conversation. So this was a question that came up a lot. It was in a lot of the conversations I had at Connect too. And this sort of worry about cannibalizing your in-person audience if you're offering a hybrid experience. So how do you really get people to show up on site if they know they can get maybe even not all of it, but some of it online or virtually? So Patrick, do you want to start? Or McNeil's ready to go.
Yeah, I'll say a couple things, and then McNeil can chime in. Yeah, I think it's really, owning the fact that, you might have some cannibalization, but you know what? I'd rather have more people watch my event in action than not. So that's why we really took the approach of saying, we know we're not going to get all 10 people from that organization to go. Let's focus on the 2 or 3 to go in person and the 7 or 8 that should attend virtually, and that's okay. What we saw at Connect this year, interestingly enough, was a lot of people that attended our hybrid event last year were first-timers in person this year because they felt the fear of missing out. They saw how cool it was to be on site. They saw the great interactions that were happening and the excitement of a packed ballroom and people clapping and a cool opener and things like that, and wanted to take part the next year. So you might be cannibalizing a little bit, but you're also creating a feeder system for next year's user conference because people are like, I have to go in person. And we saw that in spades this year, from Connect last August to Connect that we just ran 2 weeks ago in Vegas in April.
Yeah, I love that idea of the feeder system. And we hear this all the time. It is the number one most burning question about hybrid. And ultimately, is it going to cannibalize? And I can't tell you the number of stories I would hear from many customers that have been coming to something like Cvent Connect, our event, for years. And one of the first things they said, we had our first hybrid event in 2021. And they said, in the past, we could only send 1 or 2 or 3 people from our organization. And we'd have to take notes and then have meetings after the event to kind of share key takeaways. Now, my whole team of 20 people, they can participate in one way or another. And you better bet the next year, they all wanted to go even more. So I know that especially let's say associations, it is really important to get people physically to your event, get them to not only your sessions, but especially your exhibitors' booths. We get it. And there might be, like Patrick said, a little bit of cannibalization. But if you're really playing the long game, creating that added awareness, that added reach, acknowledging not everyone will be able to attend every single year, but keeping that touch point, keeping that exposure. Just think about it. At the biggest level, something like the NFL. Would the NFL be selling out stadiums across the globe, in London and here in the United States, and 30 plus different teams all year round if they weren't on television? Right? The added reach of that exposure creates the awareness. Or if you're thinking about football, i.e. soccer, for us Americans, that added reach and exposure doesn't ultimately take people away from the stadium. It just creates a much, much larger pool of people that want to go to the stadium. And that's more about the long game that you're thinking about. That the juice is going to worth the squeeze, as you would.
Yeah.
On this topic, I'd also say we've been talking to different, Patrick, you and I were on some calls with different CMOs that were sort of asking that same question of sort of in person or virtual. And I think what our expression was, you want both. You want people that want to go, and to McNeil's point, they're not going to go every year. Like I get a lot of invitations because of the different technologies that we purchase in terms, and I want to actually be there in person to actually see some of these, but I'm not going to go every year. But if they didn't have a in-person event, I'd actually question whether the company was having some challenges or issues in terms of why wouldn't you have an actual in-person event to share all the innovation and great roadmap and capabilities and features and new things that you're doing. So I also think for kind of the marketing organizations, by not having an in-person event, it makes, depending on the type of company you are, it makes us question the solidity of that company itself as well. So that's just something I'm going to add from kind of my point of view.
Awesome. There's some.
So Pradeep, did you ever tell us where you're joining from, by the way?
I am in the Douro Valley, Portugal. So I'm testing out our studio platform all the way from Portugal on a Wi-Fi, and it is holding up incredibly well.
Yeah, what an interesting example of a live webinar that's hybrid, that we're using technology to create this experience. So it's pretty cool stuff. This is the promise of the world we're in these days.
Yeah, really, really awesome to
from Portland to Portugal.
Yeah, and I think one of the questions, one of the questions in the chat, right? You're in Portland, Myllisa. So one of the questions in the chat was, I think, where is our studio located? We're right in Cvent's HQ, McNeil and I.
Yeah, we literally took some of the conference room space and turned it into a bit of studio with 3 cameras and some great lights and a little bit of camera switching equipment, which you've seen a little bit of that today. And we've our great producers. We got the wide shot, so you're going to see a little bit of the. Oh, you're over here. A little bit of the behind the scenes action here. But yeah, we built this out. Pradeep, you can talk a little bit about building out a studio in your own office.
We did. We leveraged. We had a kind of makeshift studio before, and we thought we'd up it a little bit. And we've got a team of about 3 folks that kind of manage it, and we do our company-wide keynotes, our departmental division meetings, and a lot of these type of events, all from our very own studio. So it has been super exciting.
Yeah. Awesome. Okay,
we will add to plan. Thanks for the suggestion, Karina.
We're basically at the top of the hour, so we want to wrap it up. Thank you, everyone who joined today. Thank you, Pradeep, Patrick, and McNeil, for a great discussion. There were tons of questions. We know we didn't get to all of them. We'll follow up with you after. Maybe we can do a blog post to address everything. But thanks again for joining. I hope you have an awesome day, everybody.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Or evening, depending on where you are.